In 1987, the Turtles creators came up with an idea for a graphic novel set approximately 25 years in the future, inspired by the famous graphic novel of that era, Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. However, this idea was archived, and it would take more than 30 years to be resurrected, eventually becoming the highest-selling book in the history of IDW publishing. Today, I'll review the story in and behind the panels of The Last Ronin. Before I start, I have to give you a full disclaimer. I'll be discussing some of the most critical spoilers for the original miniseries. So if you don't want the story ruined for you, you should check out the story first. Let's continue. To the general public, the existence of this story was revealed in 2014 on the letter pages of TMNT Volume 4 by Peter Laird, who, after being asked about stories taking place in the future of the Mirage timeline, remembered a project he and Kevin Eastman worked on in 1987. In that story, the two Turtles creators brainstormed the future of the four brothers, and even stories taking place after their deaths. Unfortunately, he barely remembered that the story took place 25 years in the future. Years passed, and by 2019, Tom Waltz, the then writer of the TMNT book, was approaching the end of his run with the conclusion of the City at War saga. One day, Waltz asked Kevin if there was something he wanted to do while the main book was handled by other artists. Kevin remembered that brainstorming session of 1987, a potential black and white hardcover graphic novel inspired by Batman: The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. According to Kevin, the story took place 30 years in the dystopian future of 2017 and was meant to be the end of the Turtles, their final story. But the story, as envisioned by the creators, wasn't exactly The Last Ronin. In fact, there was no Last Ronin in it. In that story, April and Casey were married briefly and had a kid. They later separated, and April remarried and had 2 more kids. That marriage also ended in divorce. But by the beginning of the story, Casey Jones would die in April's arms. When this was brainstormed, you must remember that April and Casey weren't a couple yet. In fact, the characters hadn't met each other yet, as it predates the Northampton exile years. In any case, April had to contact the Turtles since this menace was related to them. But this proved hard to do, as the Turtles broke up and went their separate ways. This is also something that continued to happen in more than one iteration of the franchise, including the original. Desperate, April would awake Professor Honeycutt, the Fugitoid, to use his Mentawave powers to communicate with the Turtles. And that is all I know about the original premise, but it was enough to get Tom Waltz excited about writing the story. They asked Peter Laird for his blessing, and after he gave his approval, Kevin, Tom, and TMNT editor Bobby Curnow started working on it. But of course, a dystopian future taking place in 2017 sounded like an unnecessary twist, so the writers decided to set the story in a sliding timeline, taking place 30 or fewer years in the future, without an actual year ever being defined. Another change was about the next generation. The original premise hinted at the kids of April as the ones taking over the story. But for The Last Ronin, the focus will be put on April and Casey's daughter, Casey Marie Jones. Since the original story was set in the future of the Mirage universe, a decision had to be made about how much a reader needed to know about this world. They opted to create a new universe that felt familiar enough for old and new fans of the franchise. This new universe would also allow for further stories set in the same continuity. The story was influenced by Frank Miller's work on Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. Still, in the final product, one can see many other influences, like Blade Runner, Akira, and Frank Miller's Ronin. However, one of the strongest influences came from another IDW comic. When they started drafting the miniseries, there were no Ghost Brothers talking to Mikey. They were added later on because a comic without the usual banter among the Turtles felt empty. This idea was borrowed by Tom Waltz from Brian Ruckley's Transformers comic book, who did something similar with the character Cyclonus. Having the Ghost Brothers helped make the story feel like a more classic TMNT story about family. Another big question was about who should be the last survivor of the clan. The answer was Mikey, because the other 3 options were either too obvious or unlikely. The only other option was Donnie, and they already had April to deal with all the technological challenges. Also, for Kevin, using Mikey for the role had a symbolic meaning, since he was the first turtle to be created. To Kevin, it would have been perfect to make him the last one standing. Choosing Michelangelo, a character who would usually try to avoid the cycle of revenge between the two clans, also posed interesting philosophical conflicts. He was a turtle trapped in a war he never wanted in the first place, but he now needed to win or die trying. As for the story's villain, Kevin suggested a character named Hiroto as the new master of the Foot Clan. Since this was initially planned for the Mirage continuity, it couldn't be the Shredder, as he was long gone. However, the idea was for Hiroto to be a descendant of the Shredder. That was when Tom Waltz suggested naming him Oroko Hiroto and making him the son of Karai, the Shredder's daughter. And since they were already getting creative with it, Tom also suggested making Splinter a member of the rival Hamato clan. Kevin thought about it, and it simply made sense in the context of an Oroku-Hamato feud. And it was easy for new readers to grasp as well. Visually, the dystopian city would be vertically segregated by class, with Oroku Hiroto living in the upper level, and the old city remaining in the lower level, known as Rock Bottom. Below Rock Bottom would be the sewers, where the Resistance would live. The 5 issues were published between October 2020 and April 2022, and were plagued with delays. The first issue, in particular, was delayed because it was going to be penciled in by Andy Cohn, who, due to personal reasons, had to leave the title with half the issue already done. He was replaced by Esau and Isaac Escorza, with layouts by Kevin Eastman and additional help from Ben Bishop and Kevin Eastman. Luis Antonio Delgado, Rhonda Pattison, and Samuel Plata colored the 5 issues. Now, let's jump into the story. At some point in the near future, April and Casey were waiting for the Turtles to tell them the news about their engagement. But after being late for a while, the Turtles arrived with a convalescent Splinter. The Foot Clan ambushed them when they were coming out of the sewers, violating their non-violence truce. The Turtles and Casey were in a rush to save Splinter's life, and didn't notice that Raphael snuck out, looking for revenge. Raphael attacked several Foot Ninjas until he found Karai, who was now looking too much like Daredevil's Elektra. Their clash ended tragically, with Raphael's death and Karai falling into a coma. 10 years later, in Japan, Karai's son, Oroku Hiroto, was instated as master of the Foot Clan. His first order was to invite the Hamato clan to Japan for a parley. Up to that point, the Turtles, constantly clashing with the Foot Clan, gained new human allies, including Casey's strike team, and relied on the Fugitoid for assistance. The Fugitoid covertly aided Donatello and Splinter's journey to Japan, while the others remained in New York to avoid jeopardizing the talks. However, Baxter Stockman, in pursuit of the Fugitoid, located it at the Turtles' base in the second time around store, and sent Foot Ninjas to seize the android. In a fierce battle to protect the Fugitoid, Leonardo, Michelangelo, April, Casey, and his team fought valiantly. Realizing Stockman's determination, the Fugitoid threatened self-destruction to deter him. Baxter, thwarted, chose to detonate the store instead. The explosion tragically resulted in Casey and Leonardo's deaths, and April suffered severe injuries, losing a leg and an arm, all while being unknowingly pregnant with Casey Marie. Michelangelo believed he was the sole survivor of the explosion, and he hastily gathered a few belongings from their former lair and set out for Japan, intent on warning Splinter and Donatello about the potential trap. Meanwhile, Splinter and Donatello had already arrived in Japan and met with the Hamato clan at the designated rendezvous point. However, it quickly became apparent that it was a setup designed to ambush them. The Hamato clan managed to force the Foot Clan into retreat, but not without significant losses. Both Donatello and Splinter fell in battle. Michelangelo arrived too late and was met with the devastating news. The only remnants of his family were Donatello's staff and Splinter's journal. Overwhelmed by grief and unable to bear the burden of loss, Michelangelo declined the Hamato clan's offer to stay and sought solitude in the mountains instead. In New York, April finally came out of the hospital and heard from the survivors of Casey's strike team that they found the Fugitoid's head. Understanding its importance, April safeguarded it, aware that reactivating it could potentially alert Baxter to its existence. Meanwhile, in the Japanese mountains, Mikey faced the harsh cold. His survival seemed uncertain, but perhaps due to his mutation, mirroring the natural hibernation instincts of turtles, he remained dormant, enduring the freezing conditions for a long time. He eventually awoke, haunted by voices that echoed a message. His destiny was still unfulfilled. Over the ensuing years, Mikey devoted himself to meditation and survival in the wilderness, until his solitude was disrupted by a band of ruthless men intent on killing him for sport. Defeating them, Mikey recognized their lack of honor, which sparked a realization within him. He needed to return and fulfill his destiny, not just for honor, but for the deeper sense of purpose. He trained rigorously with the guidance of Splinter's journal and mastered various martial arts. This globe-spanning journey of self-discovery and training is a tale recounted in the Lost Years miniseries, which I'll explore in a future video. As the last standing member of his clan, with no master to guide him, Mikey embraced the path of a Ronin. After 16 years in exile and his training complete, he returned to New York, ready to confront whatever awaited him. Armed with his brother's weapons, Mikey was poised to infiltrate New York and confront Oroku Hiroto. Haunted by visions of his brothers, he engaged in what seemed like imaginary or ghostly conversations with them. Navigating the tower, he encountered Baxter Stockman's synthetic ninjas, then nicknamed Sinjas, from the high-tech Foot Clan. In a fierce confrontation, a large mouser shoved Mikey through a window, sending him plummeting towards what seemed like a certain death. However, years of mutation had fortified Mikey, transforming him into a formidable figure with rapid healing abilities. He narrowly escaped the cyborgs and sought refuge in the sewers, where Casey Marie, witnessing his fall, tracked him down. Facing his end, Mikey prepared for seppuku, honoring his brothers with their bandanas and weapons beside him. But before he could complete the act, he collapsed. Casey Marie found him in this dire state and brought him to the old lair. There, April managed to revive him, pulling him back from the brink of death. After almost joining his brothers in the afterlife, he came back and found out about April and Casey Marie. Hiroto, knowing a surviving member of the Turtles that killed his grandfather was loose in the city, declared martial law. Back in the sewers, April started analyzing Mikey's mutation, and once they found out about martial law, they started thinking about their next attack. April had the idea to use the Fugitoid's head to attack Baxter Stockham's fortress to take down Hiroto's defenses. Mikey started training with Casey Marie and noticed that she had special abilities. April revealed to Mikey that their exposure to the Turtles left traces of mutagen in their DNA. The mutant DNA gave Casey Marie extra strength, speed, and healing abilities, all of which increased with age. Mikey, Casey, and April led the resistance to Baxter's stronghold on Roosevelt Island. Upon their arrival, April successfully reactivated the Fugitoid. In a surprising turn, when Baxter unsuspectingly touched the android, the Fugitoid unleashed a nanobite swarm, fatally attacking Baxter and seizing control of the fortress. This bold move crippled Hiroto's defenses, including all the synthetic ninjas, paving the way for the resistance to reclaim control of the city. However, the attack also compromised the barriers holding back the seawater. April and Casey swiftly tackled this new challenge, working to prevent the flooding of the underground facilities. After defeating the Foot Ninjas, Michelangelo reached the tower's summit to confront Hiroto, finding Karai in a comatose state between them. It was here that Mikey realized the depth of Hiroto's madness, a psychopath driven by spite for his mother's abandonment in his childhood. Before engaging in battle with Mikey, Hiroto callously ended Karai's life. He then donned a high-tech shredder suit crafted from liquid metal. The intense fight sparked fires and explosions, spilling the battle outside. In a moment of insight, Mikey breached the suit's defenses, using Leonardo's sword to stab Hiroto. Hiroto deceived Michelangelo and sliced him mortally. The battle continued through the flooded sewers and onto the muddy waters outside the walls. Hiroto finally died, along with his suit, and a dying Michelangelo was found by Casey Marie. Entrusting Splinter's journal to her, Mikey imparted a final lesson beyond his training: the importance of knowing peace. In the afterlife, Michelangelo joined his brothers, Splinter and Casey Jones, in a sunny, yet smelly New York. However, this was not the conclusion of the story. In the time that followed, Casey Marie dedicated herself to further training. April continued her research on the mutant blood samples she'd obtained from Michelangelo. This led to the creation of 4 new turtles as part of her experiment. Casey Marie, embracing her legacy and skills, would eventually step into the role of their sensei. According to Tom Waltz, Michelangelo's entire mission is kind of a ritual suicide, an honorable death on his own terms. It's bittersweet, but at least Mikey defeats his arch-enemy, avenges his family, and does so without any collateral damage to those he loves. This was foreshadowed in the first issue when Mikey tried to commit seppuku. He had to change his mind because April was still alive, and there was also a new generation. This ending also solves one of the main tragedies of the Turtles, them being the only 4 existing mutant turtles. By making Michelangelo say that it was the mutagen in their blood that made them family, then these 4 new turtles would become their descendants. Also, since the same mutagen was running through Casey Marie's DNA, that made her part of the family too. I think the series pacing is more suited to a graphic novel rather than a miniseries format, and I recommend experiencing it that way. The narrative heavily relies on flashbacks, dominating much of the second act, which results in minimal progression in the main storyline. This approach raises an important question. What captivates the readers more? The detailed flashbacks explaining how the Turtles met their end? Or the climactic battle with Hiroto? Ideally, both elements should contribute equally to the story, but the series seems to focus disproportionately on the flashbacks, leaving the framing story somewhat underdeveloped. But that's probably just me. This miniseries was exceptionally well received by fans. It became IDW's highest-selling book ever, with the second issue garnering 130,000 pre-orders, not including digital sales, mirroring the overwhelming demand for issue 1, which necessitated a second print run of 50,000. This ending left the door open to a new, grim and gritty version of the Turtles that could please a certain percentage of the fandom that wasn't getting their fix of Dark Turtle adventures in other media. However, Nickelodeon didn't feel like taking this story into the mainstream by adapting it into a movie. Considering this a niche, they decided to adapt it into an open-world video game, where the story could be adapted faithfully without worrying about catering to mass audiences. This third-person RPG would be similar to the Arkham City games, and is still being developed by Black Forest Games, set to be published by THQ Nordic. While there's no release date yet, it's expected to be available for PC, PS5, and Xbox. Drawing parallels with the successful adaptation of The Last of Us, it's not far-fetched to imagine The Last Ronin thriving as a video game, and potentially evolving into a sophisticated TV series in the future. Mainstream or not, the marketing machine worked well for this story. It's inspired a range of collectibles, including statues, an action figure line by NECA, the ever-popular Funko Pops, and even a Playmates toy specially designed by TMNT artist Mike Dooney. And since the Last Ronin universe is still open for more stories, it already had a prequel, a special, and a sequel named Re-Evolution that's in publication right now. So what are your thoughts on the original miniseries? How would you like The Last Ronin to be adapted next? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.